Yeah, I'm going to be sharing my desktop more so than just the slides themselves, primarily because I think this one would be really good if we sort of went over kind of slides while simultaneously doing it together. So today we're going to be talking about automatic reports with Rmarkdown. And this is something that was kind of fairly new to me when I was in graduate school at UCLA. A lot of the times when you do a lot of work, you can open up an R script like this and just have a whole bunch of code just like all around. And it's good for you if you're the one writing it because you understand it. But sometimes when you want to relay your results to a collaborator or your PI, oftentimes you don't want to just send them a .r file with like 400 lines of code that they have to then read, run to get the plots or the tables that you presented. Instead, what would be a good thing is, can you sort of find a way to sort of merge texts, tables, and files and figures together with the actual code? And that's sort of what Rmarkdown kind of does seamlessly. And basically, what you're doing is sort of creating these reports. So if we go to the next slide here. And again, I want to just reiterate, I didn't write these slides. These were slides from last year that I sort of am kind of going over. So some of the things on these slides are also going to be new to me. But the idea here with Rmarkdown is you're sort of bridging the two. So getting the data, running the code, sort of like what we learned in days 1 and 2. And then generating reports, whether that be an HTML file, a Word file, a PDF, a slideshow, a Shiny app. It's sort of like the bridge to connect these two things together. So the way an Rmarkdown file would look would just kind of look like what you see here. And if you guys want to sort of join along with me, I'll be doing this in R just right now. So I think my desktop is shared, so you should be able to see my R screen too, right? Can you see the R screen, the R Studio app? All right, great. So to start off with creating an Rmarkdown file, what I like to normally do is go in your R Studio console, go to File, go to New File, and Rmarkdown. You can name it whatever you want. So I named this test author, and then you can already have default ways of how you want the output to be, if you want it to be a PDF or an HTML or a Word file. There's also an option for presentations, Shiny apps, so just sort of like little web apps, or you could get these some templates, which I'll kind of go over a bit more later on. But for now, let's just open up an Rmarkdown document. Let's just say we're going to create an HTML file. And when you do that, it'll kind of create this for you. So it's already sort of like a format that you're going to be having here. And so you can see this is the Rmarkdown file. If you haven't seen it before, it's kind of a combination of actual regular text as well as a place to kind of put your R code in. So again, just like what we have here, we have text, which is like Markdown language. Then we also have chunks of code. By default, you could do R, but there are other ways you can do this. Markdown is just general, so you can also do this for like Python, and I believe Julia, which is another programming language as well. And I think you could do this for several other programming languages too. So we create this Rmarkdown file that we have here, and the next thing we're going to do is sort of knit this. So the knitting is sort of like rendering the output. So the easiest way to render your output, and this is just the code itself, is to just hit the knit file here. You could kind of change it to however you want. If you want to knit to PDF or knit to Word, but by default, you're knitting to what you have over here, which is an HTML document. So when you knit, it'll just sort of run and it'll output this file here. So this is sort of your HTML file. You can see it's a combination of the text, the exact same text that you wrote over here, as well as some R code, and not just the R code, but also the output as well. So this is pretty cool, right? So if you're someone who wants to, show something to your PI, you can easily just say, okay, like here's the data that we uploaded, here's the CSV file, and this is the data frame that we have, and here is like the averages, or here is like the mean or the median of a specific variable. And so you can just do that through this file over here. So that's sort of like the basics of our Markdown. So this is how it sort of works. You have this R Markdown file. You sort of knit to regular Markdown file, and then the output sort of becomes whatever you want it to be. Here it's a PDF, or sorry, here it's an HTML file. If you wanted to knit to a PDF, you can knit to a PDF. Takes a little bit of time. And then here you have a PDF file of the same exact thing, right? So this the actual content's the same, but this is knitted to a PDF file. If you knit to a Word document, you can do that as well, but just knitting to Word. And so that's sort of kind of like the basics of our Markdown. Let's see. So there are some things you can do here with our Markdown. You can tell that this isn't just straight up, text. There are specific like symbols. There are specific headers that are happening here, and so you might be wondering what's going on. And so what's going on here is that it's basically these are sort of like giving knitter instructions as to what you're doing with that text. So typically the pound signs here sort of indicate whether or not you're looking at a header. So if you have one pound sign, that's like the first header, so it's going to be the largest. If you want like a subheader, it's going to be $2 sign, 2 pound signs, and then if you keep on going down to I think the 6th one. Oops, whoa, that was not what I wanted to do. So you go down to the 6th one over here, which is the smallest header. So you could think of this as like if you're writing like a paper, you have like that section, subsection, subsection, subsection. That's sort of what you're doing with these headers over here. So if I wanted to create a high level header, so like header 1, I don't know, section 1.1 and section 1.1.1. And the good thing about using this in RStudio is that when you do the pound sign headers, it's already going to be highlighting it for you, so you can distinguish this from your actual text. So in doing so, when I hit knit, now what you're going to be seeing are all these headers that I created, right? So header 1, section 1.1.1. So that's what the high level pound sign is doing. You can emphasize certain texts, so you can italicize, you can bold, you can combine the two, you can strike through. And so here's the Markdown text, typically 1 asterisk or an underscore is used to sort of do an emphasis in italics. You could do 2, so underscore or star, and that gives you bolded letterings. Combine them. So here's a combination of combining both underscores and italicized text and bold text. And if you're in a scratch, you can do just the tilde sign, 2 of them, and then you can do that. And that's what you can see here as well with these over here. So here we have the 2. So if you remember what 2 was, 2 represents bolding. So if I were to look at my actual knitted file, you can see that the word knit is bolded as it is over here. You can make lists, both ordered and just simple lists. So that can be done just by typing 1 dot, 2 dot, so on and so forth. If you wanted to do lists that are unordered, you can just do an asterisk or a plus or minus sign. So, for example, things we learned this week, then you can just do plot, dplyr, Markdown. So if you were to run this, you can see that here are those 3 lists over here. If you wanted to bold them, like we saw, we can just do this. This is to strike through, and this is to just italicize. When you knit this, it reads it, and you can see that we have all those 3 options that we've done. This is sort of an idea of how you could just create like a list. If you want to order, you just change this to 1, 2, and 3. And then that should be all you need to do to get them to be an ordered list. Sometimes you want to combine links. By doing so, you're able to, instead of having this gigantic hyperlink, you can easily just condense it, so you can create like a shortcut. So that's what's being done over here. So here are some examples of how you do that. So here is an inline style link. So what you're doing is you're basically allowing you to click this to go to github.com without actually having to say github.com as the text, right? So here's like, that's the example. You'd have the text you want to be presented in your square bracket, and then the link you want to direct to in your just simple parentheses. And then here's an inline style link with a title. So it's sort of the same thing, except after your parentheses, you sort of can add in quotations the title you'd like. So let's see. And then here is if we're going to link the text itself. So this is like a reference to a specific header. And if you just wanted to do the link itself, you can just do it in the triangular bracket, the angled brackets. So, you know, you don't want to say you don't want to replace it with a specific text. You can automatically just link it by using what I would use, which is the angled brackets. And that's sort of what's going on over here. So if you see here, it's in the angled brackets. So rmarkdown.rstudio.com will be shown as the text, but it'll be a link that you can connect to. So again, if you knit this, we can see that it's here. If you wanted to change this, like we talked about, we can do square brackets, rmark, and just call this text rmarkdown. Oops. Rmarkdown link here, and then just change this to square bracket parentheses. So simply, I'm just doing square brackets here, and then parentheses here for the link. And then when I knit this, then we can see that I replaced that actual link with the text rmarkdown link here. And when you click this, you'll be able to go to the rmarkdown URL. So that's kind of convenient, especially if you want to just like link to certain websites, if it's like a reference to a paper, or if it's a reference to like a database you got the data from, you can easily just put the link onto your rmarkdown. And sometimes it's better to use the condensed version using like a text here, because some of these links can be egregiously long and it'll just overflood your text. You can add images. So here's a way you can add an image. Here is the markdown text, and based off this markdown text, you could get the rendered text over here. And so you can do it, I think, based off of your home directory, or you can do it based off of a web link. And so this one's based off this web link. So if you actually just copy and paste this link, you'll get the same exact photo. In terms of syntax, if you want to do inline code, we can just sort of use these backticks around it to sort of tell you the code within the text. So for example, if you want to look at something like to calculate the mean of a vector x, since this is like the output, simply type mean x. And in doing so, what we can see is we have sort of like the code within the text itself. This isn't running the code, it's just sort of showing it in like a code format. So sometimes this might be helpful, and then maybe you want to sort of do mean something here to sort of give an idea of what you're doing. And so that's what's happening here with inline coded text. And to do this, you just do one backtick. If you're going to do block quotes, you can just do the greater than sign. And to do so, you could just do that plus whatever text you want to write, and it'll automatically give you a block quote over here. So I'll come, and then doing so, knit this, here's that block quote right over here. You can also create tables. Tables are a bit harder to do. It takes a little bit of time to sort of get the syntax for a table. Luckily, all of you will have this. This is already linked up onto the GitHub page. So if you're going to go back and see it, feel free to do that. But here we can see how we can create tables. We use colons to sort of align columns. And then there must be at least 3 dashes separating each header cell, and then the outer pipes are optional. But it's kind of a good way to make it look pretty. So this still renders nicely as it does with the top one, but obviously this kind of reads a bit awkward. If you were to read this in code, it's kind of not as nice as, say, looking at it like this, but they'll still give you the same sort of output. You can see that both of these tables are still nicely produced, even though the code might look a little bit ugly as it does over here. So those are just some of the examples you can do with Markdown. Another one that's not included here is to do mathematical equations. And so that can be done using the $sign. If any of you are familiar with LaTeX, it's sort of you could sort of write this in LaTeX form. So if you want to say integral 0 to infinity f of x dx, then when you knit this, then you can see that that equation comes up. And to do that, you just do the $sign on the ends and on the outs. And I'm trying to see if the double $sign works too. Yeah, so just like in LaTeX, if any of you are familiar with LaTeX, the single $sign produces it within the text. Well, like if you wanted it as an actual equation, you just do the double $sign over here. So that's sort of how it's like.
I think you can also use the equation environment as well.
Like slash begin equation?
Yeah.
I've never tried that using LaTeX. It seems like it'll work, but it's
yeah, it could be.
Sun xi. Right. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, so you can also use the LaTeX slash begin equation slash end equation way of doing it. This and the double $signs are equivalent for the most part. So either way works, but this way you can sort of include, the equations for certain things. So, for example, to calculate the mean of vector x, if you type mean, well, here's also the mean in, in the mathematical formula. So this is kind of good if you want to sort of teach somebody how to code and like how to program something in R while also teaching them statistics simultaneously. And so this is one way you can do that. So you can do the equations as well by typing in slash begin equation or the double $sign. The single $sign can be used if you want to do inline text, sort of like how we had for the code. So we can add on to this, calculate the mean of a vector, simply type x, which mathematically is some I, xi, and then we can just have it like that. So this is like if you wanted to do it like inline text, or you have it as an actual equation. It's kind of similar to the inline texting for codes. So that's kind of like the most popular ways to do Markdown in terms of how to create headers, emphasis, lists, links, images, syntax, quotes, and tables. There's a lot of other ways you can customize it, but I think this is a good place for us to come up with a small little activity for you all. So if you all have this readily available, or if you have your Rmarkdown open, I would like you all to sort of try to recreate this output over here. So as you can see, we have hello world. This is going to be here's a little hint. It's going to be an H1 or a first level header. This is a Markdown document. It's going to be a second level header. And then note, the bold, note the strike through, note the italicized text. So maybe just take a few minutes and note that we have a list over here. So take some time, maybe like a minute or two to try to reproduce this. And then we have the solution over here too. So I'll give you all like a little bit of time to do this. And if you have any questions right now, feel free to ask.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but the nice thing of Markdown is that it's actually everywhere, even on Slack. So if you are a user of Slack, you can actually use Markdown to highlight stuff. And I think equations, I'm not sure if equations might be supported, but blocks of code also work. So yeah, there you go.
So here's an example. This is George on my Slack, but if I were to do blocks of code, you could just do code, right? So emphasize again, you can emphasize, strike through.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, not everything works. Not everything works.
Yeah, but most things work. Italicize works, bold works.
Yeah.
Code inline works. Does math equations work? Not sure about math equations,
No.
but some of the big ones work. So you could do that on Slack. A lot of things use it. And the good thing about Rmarkdown is that it is its flexibility, not only in creating slides. So these slides themselves are created using Rmarkdown. Obviously, a little bit more sophisticated because they're able to create tabs and things. But you can also do this for posters, and I'll go over all that at the end. I think there's a small, quick tidbit of slides you can look at. All right. Well, I think that's a little bit of time, enough time. If you want to still work on it, go ahead. If you don't want to look at the solution, just mute me for the next 1 minute. But here's the solution to do to reproduce this task, right? So again, the first, we have a header here. It's the first header, so just do £1 second level header, you do 2 pound signs. Remember how humans here is bolded, so because of that, we're going to do the double asterisk for bolding. The text here is quite standard, so nothing changes here, but note that we have a list as well as strike through text. So here's how we create the list, and here's how we create that strike through text on the bottom of the first listed item. And then of course we have more text over here, and then the words far superior are italicized, and so that can be done using a single underscore. And so that's how you can get that text done. Another cool thing about Rmarkdown, something that I like doing, is here we can see that we're saying here's the title, here's the author. I forgot to talk about this, but this might be important to talk about now. But we have the title, author, date, and the output option over here. And we can see that it's reflected here as title, author, date. You could change these however you want. Something I like doing with my text, so it's easier for me to read and easier for my clients to read, is to create a table of contents. It's really nice to have because you don't have to scroll through everything to be able to find the section you want to look at, especially if your Rmarkdown is like 40, 50 pages long. Instead, you can create a table of contents. I'm trying to find out how to do that. I had it somewhere. Here it is. Okay. So to do this for HTML document, let's just go over here. So here's the HTML document. You could type in table of contents, make this true. And then the depth of it, essentially all this is saying is how deep in the headers do you want the table of contents to go. So in this case, I only want to go to the second level header. So an example of how this will look, it can look like chapter 1, section 1, section 1.1. So when you knit this, we can see that here we have chapter 1, section 1, Rmarkdown, and all these things. So note that section 1.1 is not included because this is a third level header, and the depth of my table of contents only goes to the second one. So if you want to change this to 3, now you will see section 1.1 on the table of contents as well. But this is kind of good if you want to, like, I don't know, here, typically when I do these for clients, I'll have like, here's my data cleaning step or my data input step. That's like one header. Data cleaning step is my second header. Simple univariate analyses, third header. Fourth header is like multivariate analyses. Fifth header would be like results. And so if you're the client, you don't care about the cleaning, so you could just skip that and just go to section 2 instead of reading all of section 1. Maybe you are more focused on how the data was cleaned, so you want to go to section 1 instead. Or maybe you want to go back and forth to univariate and multivariate analyses, so you could just type in 4 and 5, 4 and 5, and keep on going back that way. So there's a lot of flexibility using Rmarkdown. I tend to like having table of contents. Many people may not. That's just personal preference. And you can see it's kind of written, at least I did this example like in, I don't know, book format. So chapter 1, section 1, section 1.1. So we could go down more. The next thing is now we can kind of, now that we understood how to kind of work with the text version of Rmarkdown using the Markdown text, the next, for the next few minutes or 10, 20 minutes, we can talk about how we can sort of use R in our Markdown, right? That's the other half of the word Rmarkdown. And it's really nice to be able to sort of use R simultaneously while going into Markdown. So for example, let me just remove some of these texts here since it's kind of irrelevant. It was only for this example. But here we have some R code that we want to look at. So hitting the triple back tick and then saying R kind of tells Markdown that we're using R. Cars is the data set that we're looking at. You can easily just remove this and put data cars over here if you wanted to. I would probably recommend doing this just because it's more obvious what data set you're using. And just for here, I want to look at the summary, so I'm hitting summary cars. And so this chunk of code is telling me what I want to do and what I want to output. And so that's what we can see here. We could do a lot of other things. So here is how the data frame looks. And then we can do some more. Just type in cars. It's as if you're doing this in R, right? So if you're doing this in R, you would do the exact same thing. So here's the output in R, right? Just here's cars in R. And then if I were to do this in R Markdown, it looks exactly the same, right? So that's sort of like the output. This is like the output you would see in your R console, just in the HTML file. So it's pretty cool. You can show this to your collaborators if you want to, kind of what we learned for ggplot, right? So cars, filter. If you guys all remember what the filter function did yesterday, speed greater than 4. If y'all remember, what I'm doing here is creating a data frame where I'm looking at all cars such that speed is greater than 4. And yes, that's probably why, because I didn't define dplyr. So let's define dplyr so we can be able to do this. There we go. And so now we have the subset of cars such that the speed is greater than 4. So here's a combination of what we learned from yesterday on dplyr and what we're learning today, which is on Markdown. So this is a way how you can sort of seamlessly use both, seamlessly implement R, integrate R into your Markdown code. So we're going to create this example here of you can see it's pretty cool. But we're going to create a leaflet graph. To be able to do this, you need to install the package leaflet. I'm not sure if everybody has that. So if not, in your R console, just type install.packages leaflet in quotes and let that run. I don't think I have it, so let me do that too. There we go. All right. And I wish I had this code available instead of having to manually write this. So here, I'm just going to copy this code for verbatim. Leaflet type add tiles type add markers. Let's do it here so I can read this. Language equals longs to negative 118.196980. That equals 34.065764. Pop-up equals Soto Street. So if I were to knit this, what happened here? Add times. Oh, that's what. And then put that there. And this hopefully should work. No, 1.9690. Why am I so far off? This does not look. Yeah, negative 118. Whoops, not 119. There we go. We're not in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So here you can see, this is just something, kind of an add-on, but it's the leaflet sort of R package, which allows you to sort of nicely kind of point like a pop-up map, like you would kind of like in Google Maps. You can state the longitude and latitude, which this corresponds to the Soto building. You click this, it says Soto Street building. That's really cool, and that's what this pop-up argument is telling you to do. You can zoom out. You can zoom in, so it's pretty cool. But now we can see here that this was the text that I wrote, and within this code, it then outputs this plot directly into my Rmarkdown. That's what's going on here. And that's this first piece of code chunk. Oh, no. And so here's the rendered output, which is exactly what I showed you. Here we're just customizing a few functions within the code part of the Rmarkdown. So we can see here we have echo equals F, eval equals T. So echo just means, do you want to echo out the actual code? So you can see here that when you have both the code plus the evaluated, output, whether evaluated result, whether it's going to be a plot or if it's going to be a table or a figure or something. And so here, what I'm doing when I'm saying echo equals false and eval equals T is I want the output to still show, but I don't want to show the actual code. So this is sort of what you'd get when you're rendered output. So it's a bit different, right? So here's the rendered output. Here's the first rendered output where you have the actual code and then you have the actual plot. The second only has the plot and no code. If you reverse them, so echo equals true and eval equals false, this will echo out the code. So you can see the actual code in the Rmarkdown, but the output isn't going to show. And so that's what's going to happen here. So there's no plot, but we have the code echoed out into our Rmarkdown. There are certain things you can do too. If you want to sort of scale the size of your figure, you can do out.width equals 40%, out.height equals 40%, and it sort of scales the figure. So this is how it'll look. Note that this is much bigger than it is over here. It's the same figure, you can tell, but it's just shrunk a bit, scaled by 40% based off of the output that I showed. So that's what's going on. There are ways you could align the figure to be centered. I think that's fig.align equals center. That's another option you can do. And there are several other options to sort of manipulate the way your figure looks within the Rmarkdown. There are other languages you can use. As I said before, it's not just, the Markdown isn't just specific to R. Although, just because this is our bootcamp, I was focusing, primarily on R. But you can use Python, which you have here. You can use sort of bash script language, which you have over here. Again, all you're doing is just the three backticks, and then indicating what language you're using. In this case, you have to also indicate the pathway of the actual application. And then this is just writing it. And then this is just like Python code over here. And this is going to be spitting out Python code as your rendered output. And so there's a lot you could do. C, you could do R, you could do Julia, Python, Stan. So there's all these other languages you can use seamlessly within Markdown too. Now, so lastly, I want to talk about a few additional packages you can sort of, or a few different packages that sort of also abuse the Rmarkdown sort of format. So here we have sideR. So this is a kind of like an add-on, but it provides functions and RStudio admin to search sort of like a bib text file, so you could create citations seamlessly. And that's what's going on here. And here's a little example of how that looks. So you just type it insert citations, and it can easily take you to what citation you want to look at. There's a whole host of these. I'm not too familiar with Sharingan, which is something written by Yi Hui, who is also sort of like the big name in this field. But there's a way you can make presentations, which is what's being done over here. There's an extra Sharingan extra extension to the Sharingan R package. Again, I'm not too familiar with this, so I don't want to go over this too much in depth. Maybe George can chime in and talk about this a bit.
Yeah, no, I actually don't use them. I just know people, the cool kids use them.
Yeah. And this is like the hipster way of using of doing things nowadays. But there is already an embedded way to do slides in R Markdown. That's sort of how we did these slides. Is how I did my slides yesterday. You can use IO slides, which if you go to R Markdown, here is the presentation kind of form. And then instead of having a document that we have now, you can do a presentation instead. And you can do this in IO slides. That's the way I did my presentation yesterday. You can do Beamer for those of you who are more familiar with LaTeX. You can also do Beamer as well to create these slides. There's a lot of other blank down packages you can do. Here is, so we had Markdown, so here's page down. This is pretty neat. You can create CVs using page down. So it's going to look like, it's using R to write a CV. And you know, it's already written, the code is already written in a way where you know, the output looks really nice. And you don't necessarily have to do a lot of work on your own end. It's already kind of already done, and it's embedded into the R code. All you got to do is, you know, just change, you know, where you went to school, your degree, what you're doing. All you got to do is just change that text, but then the actual like format and the structure is already sort of there for you, so you don't have to do any of that yourself. You can create posters using page down. So this is an example of a poster being written using page down. Here's another package. These again, I'm not too familiar with these packages, but here's vitae, which is another way to do your CV. Again, you know, it's easy to use, but it may not be easily customized, right? Because this is a lot of this is done based off of what the author wanted to do. So if you wanted to change this text color, or you wanted to change the orientation of certain things, might be hard. But you know, it's a good kind of base to know how you would do a CV in R. Here's poster down. So another way you can create a poster in R if you're going to a conference or you're presenting. Here's an easy way of making a poster. I used to do this using Beamer. I know people used to do this thing. People are used to doing this in PowerPoint, and I feel like those aren't the best ways of doing it, especially if you want to show code and, you know, results and figures and all these things. It might be easier to just do it all in Markdown, because we can do all of those things at the same time. So here are examples of posters that are written using this poster down R package. And here's the GitHub to sort of go and link. Here's the GitHub to go and install, and you know, allowing you to install the package. Here's blog down, sort of a way to make a static website based off of Rmarkdown. It's actually the way I made my website. So if you wanted to check, I made this website over here. It hasn't been updated, but this is all using blog down. So we have like these things. I have hyperlinks. I have education interests, links to my LinkedIn, GitHub, research interests that I'm working on, recent publications, and this is all done in Markdown. Like I didn't have to learn CSS or PHP or any of those programming languages. I just had to put this literally in my Markdown and then just run it. So it is a lot easier to do, especially if you're already familiar with R. And so blog down is a way for you to sort of create website sort of skeletons. You still need a link, but I believe you can get links off of GitHub or Netlify. So here are some recommended readings. That's kind of the end of this talk. But here are some recommended readings. Yi Shea is probably the most popular person in terms of everything Markdown. So he has a text over here that sort of is like the definitive guide to our Markdown. It's free, which is pretty cool. So you can tell. And again, this is written, and I believe this is written in Bootcamp, which is like the textbook version of Markdown. And so you can kind of come here and just, if you have any questions, you can, you know, come here and just see how you can do certain things. Typically, when I Google help for R Markdown, it just redirects me to one of his books, to be honest. There's also other ones. Here's like just like dplyr, you have a Markdown, R Markdown cheat sheet, which I guess is not available. The Markdown one is. So the Markdown one is available. This kind of just teaches you most of the things I already taught you. And so if you wanted to see that, you can see in here. Actually, this is exactly the same thing as was in the examples. But here's the cheat sheet for for just simple Markdown. I believe there's also one for Rmarkdown. It might not just be showing. Let me just try to find one on Google. Rmarkdown cheat sheet. Spelled cheat wrong, but it's okay because Google knows what I'm talking about. Now, here it is. So you can easily go to this link. I'll post this onto the chat. But here is sort of a cheat sheet on how to use Rmarkdown too. And yeah, and here's also a good little quick 10-minute tutorial link for those of you who are interested. And that's it. That's all I have. If you have any questions, feel free to add them onto the chat. If you want to try things in Rmarkdown, I would highly recommend it. One cool thing you might want to do is sort of take what we learned yesterday and trying to implement them into Markdown. So instead of having like one chunk of R code that just spits that up, but you could sort of use Rmarkdown to sort of tidy that up. So it's a combination of doing day 3 and day 2. And if you want to add plots, you can merge day 1 in there as well. So it's like a natural progression of how you would use R personally and how you might want to show R to other people.